This is Section 6 review. We're talking about the long run implications of fiscal policy in this section, and we'll see what we think the AP people are going to test you on. As you look at this one, talk about balanced budgets, deficits, surpluses, if they were good or bad. What's going to happen is a budget balance and that kind of thing. I don't know if that would really be testable or not. These two concepts of recessionary gap and inflationary gap, those are definitely going to be testable, I would say. I would have these things graphed out. I would have what to do when something is broken, what you could do in terms of like fiscal policy. If there's a recessionary gap, you want to, cut taxes or increase transfers, whatever that would be, fix those two things. I think that would definitely be a testable thing. When you look at like business cycles, historically, I don't think that would be on the test. I don't think, even this kind of stuff. Should a budget be balanced? That'd be a super interesting question to ask. I don't know. We've never seen a question like that before, ever. Like just an open-ended sort of back up your opinion with some facts kind of stuff. It would be interesting to see them ask something like that. I just don't see it happening. Um, deficits, we do have a deficit if you want to look at when that happened and who added most to the debt. Sometimes it's surprising, but again, probably not on the test at all. Um, you know, should the government do things or control debt? Um, yes, we should. Do politicians like to do that? No, because it's tough to stay elected if you start cutting programs. Um, you know, implicit liabilities, things that we have in here that you're going to be responsible for, like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those kinds of things. Um, Again, I don't know if there would be anything that you could get tested on in that particular situation. Uh, you could get something like this where you'd have like here's a macro land is a country, and then what do they have for taxes, purchases, transfers, etc., and then where are they in the business cycle? Ooh, are they in a recession? Ooh, are they in an expansion? That would be something that you could certainly get, like a word problem like that. Monetary policy, like remember in the last section you reviewed, money demand curves, money supply curves. If the Fed decides to target different interest rates, they can certainly do that, and then they can start putting more money into the system, taking money out of the system. In this, you have to be able to relate these things to each other. So, if, for example, we're in a recession and the Fed is like, "Hey, we want to get us out of this. Let's add some money to the system." You do something like this, lower interest rates. Once they lower the interest rate, you would think people would want to borrow more. They're going to start taking out that loan for their business. They're going to start making big purchases like new house, new car, those kinds of things. Get that economy moving again. You have to be careful though. You can be like a liquidity trap. You're bound by zero. You don't want interest rates to go negative where all of a sudden I'm paying you to borrow money. I mean, that doesn't make sense. So you got to be a little careful. And this is why in times when they're good, what should happen is the Fed should be pulling that money out of the system a little bit, raising up those interest rates so that then when there's bad times, they can drop them again. This latest little recession we've had here, the Fed instantly just did everything, right? Just pushed it all out there. Now you can get basically zero interest rates on loans and things. It is pretty crazy. And the problem is, even though there's a zero interest rate, like money is free to borrow basically, um, people still aren't investing or borrowing because it's just the unknown, and you don't know when people or your customers are going to come back to your business. Um, as you look at it, we could target a higher interest rate, right? These would be when times are good. You're trying to control maybe inflation, get some money out of the system. Um, Expansionary monetary policy, when you see on the right side, you saw that there was a recessionary gap. So how did we fix it? We decided to expand our monetary policy by lowering that interest rate. And then what's going to happen? Aggregate demand is going to shift to the right, and we're going to get back to that full employment spot where we are as a country in the best, right on that long run average supply curve. If we're doing something like this, like, oh no, we are in some sort of expansionary, inflationary gap, right? Where we're overcooked the economy. And you can see that on the graph on the right. The graph on the left, what are we going to do? We're going to take some money out, raise up those interest rates. What's going to happen? We're going to see aggregate demand shift to the left, and we'll come back down to where we're supposed to be. We might have to, I don't know, maybe lay some people off, or some people are going to lose their jobs. But at the end of the day, we will be back on that long run aggregate supply curve where we need to be. I don't think there'll be anything on your inflation targeting really. You can look it over if you'd like. Money output prices in the long run. Again, these are things where it kind of makes sense. Increase in the money supply leads to that increase in output, etc. And then, of course, because wages are sticky, what's going to happen? Eventually, people are going to say, hey, like when they're back here, goods are more expensive. I need to get paid more. When they demand that raise, bosses will be like, okay, I'll pay you more. And then what's going to happen? They're going to let some people go because they're like, well, we can't pay everybody more. And then we'll go back to that long run aggregate supply curve. Money people will usually say like money's neutral because as you look at that different process, all that's going to happen is prices are just going to go up. We're going to be back on that long run aggregate supply curve. We're just going to see that prices are going to be more expensive and we're going to have inflation. We can see changes in that money supply curve. When you look at those interest rates, you're going to see then the money demand curve is going to be more. And so eventually, like even if you decided to add more money into the system, then people are going to demand more money. And when people demand more money, you're going to see we're going to end up in that same sort of spot anyway. Because even though we came in and we lowered that interest rate, right? What's going to happen when people demand more money? The interest rate's going to go right back to where it was anyway. Types of inflation. This is your classical model. Basically, classical model people just said we have to wait for it, right? And as you waited for it, it could take a decade, but eventually the economy would fix itself. This is happening probably right now. Monetizing the debt. The Fed can just make money out of thin air and buy up stuff. If you just keep pumping more money into the system, what's going to happen? You're going to see that people that have money, their purchasing power is going to be eroded because people are just going to have more money in the system. So if I had money to begin with, and now all of a sudden you throw a bunch more money out there, my money now feels like it's worth less. And you can see the Fed could make a bunch of money and then pay off a bunch of debt, etc., or give that money out. Everybody be like, oh, look, I can pay my rent. But pretty soon, the people who are the landlords are going to say, well, then I need more rent because everything's going to cost more. Again, if you read that inflation tax part, inflation can erode the purchasing power of anybody who actually holds that money. The Weimar Republic and things, logic of hyperinflation. You can go look that up in your textbook if you want. There's some interesting stuff on that. Different types of inflation, right? Cost push, demand pull. Review those things. Not a bad idea. This is just describing your different output. That's called an output gap about where you are, right? In terms of like, hey, this is where this is where that is. It's just another way of saying it. The Phillips curve, you can review this. This is one that probably doesn't really apply anymore, but it's still testable on the AP test. So you probably want to have this one graphed out. What actually shifts the curve versus what just moves along the curve. If you remember in this video or whenever we did this section, we took like all the different curves together and we made a long run Phillips curve and then we had our short run Phillips curve, but then we showed you on like 4 different graphs like, hey, this is where the economy must be if this happens. And then so go back, review that section for that little module. That'd be a good idea. Be able to have all that stuff available to you so you have it all in case they ask you that question. Zero bound, remember, Monetary policy becomes ineffective because interest rates can't go below zero. That's called a liquidity trap. Gotta be careful with that one because we're right there right now. History and those types of things. Boy, you could get a question on that, I suppose. Usually it's like a multiple choice question about like Keynes or something. Remember, classical economists basically said, don't worry about it, it'll all fix itself. And then Keynes came along and said, no, we should worry about it because I'm alive for these 10 years and they all suck, so we could fix it. And then as economists started to realize that that can happen, everybody pretty much became Keynesian, and that's where we sit. So remember, Keynes, in the long run, we're all dead. So why do you want to waste your time waiting for that long run to happen when we could fix the short run problem? Um, Keynes, his theory, okay. Animal spirits, that's just business confidence. Sometimes that might be a multiple choice question. This year, I doubt it. You look at the classical again, they don't even care about the short run. Keynes does, so that's why his aggregate supply curve there is bent. I'd watch maybe a couple Jacob Clifford videos. Might not be a bad idea because then you'd end up with some good examples of what that stuff looks like and how it works together. And here you go, probably your last little piece of the puzzle. There's your classicals, there's your Keynesians, and kind of how they view what should happen between fiscal and monetary policy. We watched some videos on Keynes and Hayek that were pretty funny. And classical consensus, should we do it? Probably. All right, with that being said, there you go. Section 6 in the books. They're not going to review Section 7, and Section 8's not on the test. So that was the last one for you, macro kids. Good luck.